Dorothy Williams woke up on the morning of her 80th birthday with a sense of anticipation, a feeling unlike any other she had experienced on the countless birthdays that had come before. The warm sunlight streamed through her bedroom curtains, casting a golden glow over the framed photographs that adorned the walls, each one a snapshot of a life well lived. These photos were not just decorations, they were the story of her remarkable journey, a tale of hard work, resilience, and triumph against the odds. For 45 years, Dorothy had taught mathematics at Lincoln High School, shaping the lives of countless students, and passing on not just knowledge but wisdom and an unwavering work ethic. She had dedicated her life to her students, to her family, and to building a future for herself that was both secure and rewarding. Despite the many challenges she had faced, Dorothy had never faltered. She had managed to save every extra penny she earned, and her efforts had paid off. Her modest three-bedroom house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, had been paid off 20 years ago, and it held the memories of raising 3 successful children, memories that she cherished every single day. But her life had not been easy. Her husband, James Sr., had passed away when their youngest child was just 12 years old, leaving Dorothy to shoulder the responsibility of both family and finances. She had been thrust into the role of a single parent, but rather than being overwhelmed, she had embraced the challenge. She raised her children with love, discipline, and the values that had been instilled in her from a young age by her own parents, who had been sharecroppers. Her father had taught her the value of money, the importance of hard work, and the belief that no matter the circumstances, anyone could achieve great things through perseverance. And Dorothy had done more than manage the household, she had thrived. That morning, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping her usual cup of chamomile tea, her mind kept drifting back to the Mercedes-Benz magazine on the counter. It had been left there by her grandson Michael just a week earlier, knowing full well that this was something his grandmother had dreamed of for years. Dorothy had always admired the sleek, elegant lines of these luxury cars, envying their prestige and status. She had watched others drive them, wondering what it would be like to own one. For decades she had told herself maybe someday. But that morning, as she read the magazine, something shifted inside her. Someday wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a plan. The previous evening, Dorothy had gone over her financials one last time. She had spent years carefully investing her money, making smart choices with the same meticulous attention to detail that she had applied to her career. The daughter of sharecroppers, she had learned early on the importance of being financially savvy. While many of her colleagues spent their earnings on vacations or fancy clothes, Dorothy had invested in stocks, bonds, and real estate, always looking for opportunities to grow her wealth. Her investments had done exceptionally well, and she was now in a position to treat herself to something she had long desired. She had saved $95,000, a sum that was more than enough to purchase the Mercedes she had dreamed of for so long. As she finished her tea and began getting ready for the day, Dorothy reflected on her life and the journey that had brought her to this point. She had broken barriers one step at a time. She had been one of the first black teachers to integrate the city's school system in the 1960s, a time when racism was still rampant and opportunities for people of color were limited. She had faced daily challenges, but she had never let them deter her. She earned her master's degree while working full-time and raising 3 children alone. All 3 of her children had gone on to graduate from college and achieve success in their own right, something that filled Dorothy with immense pride. "You've earned this," she told herself firmly as she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She had worked hard for decades, and this purchase was a symbol of her dedication, her success, and her ability to overcome any obstacle that had come her way. 2 hours later, Dorothy was ready. She had chosen her finest outfit, a tailored navy blue suit she had worn to her daughter's law school graduation, paired with the pearl necklace that James had given her on their last anniversary together. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and she applied light makeup with the same steady hand that had taught thousands of students over the years. She gathered her documents, her banking statements, proof of her investments, and an excellent credit score report that she had printed out the night before, and carefully placed them in her large leather handbag. Before leaving the house, Dorothy took one last look at her reflection in the hallway mirror. She didn't just see an 80-year-old woman, she saw someone who had defied expectations and paved her own path to success. She saw a woman who had persevered through adversity, someone who had done things her way and had succeeded beyond measure. She smiled to herself, straightened her shoulders, and walked out the door, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The drive to Silverstar Luxury Motors took 20 minutes. Dorothy had researched the dealership thoroughly and knew that they had the exact model she wanted, a silver E-Class Mercedes-Benz sedan. She had spent hours online reading reviews, comparing prices, and even having her grandson Michael print out the current market values and dealer invoice prices, which were neatly organized in a folder in her handbag. As she pulled into the dealership's parking lot in her well-maintained but aging Toyota Camry, she felt a mixture of excitement and determination. This was the moment she had worked for, and she wasn't about to let anything stand in her way. The showroom was everything Dorothy had imagined and more. The floor sparkled like glass, reflecting the gleaming vehicles that stood proudly on display. Soft classical music played in the background, and the air smelled of leather and new cars. Dorothy's eyes immediately found what she was looking for: the silver E-Class Mercedes-Benz, sitting in all its glory, its sleek lines and elegant design captivating her. The price tag showed $85,000, well within her carefully planned budget. She walked slowly toward the car, her heart beating a little faster with each step. She admired the beauty of the vehicle, bending slightly to look at its luxurious interior through the window. The sense of accomplishment she felt in that moment was overwhelming. She had come so far. This car was not just a purchase. It was the culmination of years of hard work and discipline. Soon a young couple entered the showroom. Dorothy observed them as they were immediately greeted by two salespeople, who offered them coffee and water with bright smiles. Dorothy noticed the attention they received, but she remained focused on the car. 15 minutes passed, and during that time, 3 salespeople walked past Dorothy multiple times, one even brushing against her handbag while hurrying to show another car to the young couple. Not a single salesperson stopped to acknowledge Dorothy. Despite the discourtesy, she remained calm. She had faced similar treatment before, in high-end stores and restaurants, and even during her early days as a teacher when doors were often closed to her because of her race and gender. But Dorothy had learned to maintain her composure in the face of adversity. Her patience, honed over years of teaching, was being tested, but she wasn't about to let it faze her. As the showroom grew busier with more customers and salespeople, Dorothy continued to wait. She knew all too well that sometimes battles were fought quietly without fanfare, but that didn't mean they weren't important. What she was about to teach these salespeople was a lesson in dignity, respect, and self-worth, one that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents, but one that would stay with them long after the day was over. Dorothy was not just buying a car. She was reclaiming a part of herself that had long been denied in other spaces. And she would do so on her own terms. The salespeople may have ignored her for now, but Dorothy Williams knew something they did not. Her worth was not determined by how they saw her, but by how she saw herself. And in that moment she saw a woman who had earned everything she had and so much more. Dorothy Williams stood silently in the gleaming showroom, her eyes locked on the silver E-Class Mercedes-Benz that had captured her heart. She had been waiting for nearly 30 minutes now, and despite the steady flow of customers coming and going, she was still largely ignored by the sales staff. As she stood there, straight-backed and dignified, the world around her continued to bustle. A woman in yoga clothes arrived to pick up her car from service and was greeted warmly by one of the salespeople, her every need attended to. Dorothy, on the other hand, remained an unacknowledged figure in the corner of the showroom, her posture and poise demanding attention, though none was offered. With each passing minute, Dorothy's patience began to wear thin. She had dealt with this kind of dismissive behavior before, most notably in her early days as a teacher, when she had been one of the first black educators to integrate the local school system. She had learned to deal with it then, and she had learned to rise above it. But today, as she stood in this luxury car dealership, she was determined to stand her ground. After all, this was her moment. She had earned the right to be treated with respect. As the minutes dragged on, Dorothy counted each one. Old habits die hard, especially for a woman who had spent 4 decades teaching math. She knew that every moment was precious, and she wasn't going to let this one pass by without making sure she got what she came for. Finally, after 23 minutes, she had been counting, one of the salespeople, a young man in his late 20s with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch, approached her. His name tag read Brad Thompson, sales associate. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone one that Dorothy recognized all too well. It was the tone that assumed she was lost or confused, the tone of someone who believed they were doing her a favor simply by acknowledging her presence. "Are you waiting for someone? Perhaps your children, or do you need directions somewhere?" Dorothy turned to face him fully. Her pearl necklace caught the light and she stood tall, her expression calm but resolute. "No, young man," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "I'm interested in purchasing this E-Class Mercedes-Benz." Brad's face shifted slightly, the polite dismissal fading into poorly hidden amusement. He glanced around the showroom as if waiting for someone to jump out and reveal that this was some kind of prank. "This particular model?" he asked, emphasizing the word particular in a way that made Dorothy's grip on her handbag tighten slightly. "It's quite expensive. Perhaps I could show you something more suitable?" Dorothy had prepared for this moment. She had done her research, more than he likely realized. With a calm but deliberate motion, she opened her large leather handbag and pulled out a folder of documents. "I've done my research, Mr. Thompson," she said, using the same tone she had once used with students who hadn't done their homework. "I know exactly what this car costs, what features it includes, and what the dealer invoice price is. I also have," she paused as she pulled out specific papers, "documentation of my credit score, which is 850, and proof of funds for either a substantial down payment or a full cash purchase, whichever makes more financial sense." Brad's face reddened slightly, but instead of apologizing or adjusting his approach, he took a step back, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm actually quite busy with other customers right now," he said, though Dorothy could clearly see the young couple from earlier had already left the showroom, and only one other customer was in sight. "Perhaps you could come back another time, maybe bring your family with you?" At this point, Dorothy knew that her patience was being tested, but she refused to back down. She stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged. Other salespeople had stopped their activities and were watching the interaction unfold, some pretending to be busy with paperwork, but their attention was clearly fixed on Dorothy and the young man who was still standing awkwardly a few feet away. The classical music that played softly in the background now seemed at odds with the rising tension in the room. Dorothy remained unmoved. She had faced far more difficult challenges in her 45 years of teaching. She had faced rowdy teenagers, irate parents, and even resistant administrators, none of which had ever deterred her from doing what was right. This moment, this young man's dismissiveness, was just another challenge to be overcome. She had a point to make and she wasn't going to let it pass without taking action. Dorothy reached into her handbag again, this time pulling out her phone. She knew exactly what her next step would be. The lesson was about to begin, but it wasn't going to be the kind of lesson she had once taught in her classroom. No, this time she was going to teach a lesson in dignity, respect, and the power of standing up for oneself. But before Dorothy could make the call, the atmosphere in the showroom shifted. A tall man in an expensive gray suit emerged from a back office, walking quickly toward her. His gold name tag identified him as Richard Bennett, the general manager of the dealership. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Bennett asked, his voice carrying across the now quiet showroom. He looked between Dorothy and Brad, who was still standing uncomfortably a few feet away, clearly not sure how to proceed. Mr. Bennett's smile seemed friendly, but Dorothy could see the concern in his eyes, not for Dorothy's experience but for something else entirely, the possibility of a complaint. Dorothy lowered her phone but didn't put it away. She knew that this moment was just as crucial as the one with Brad. "Yes, Mr. Bennett," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "There is quite a problem." She paused, making sure he understood the gravity of the situation. "I've been in your showroom for nearly 30 minutes. During that time, I watched 5 other customers receive immediate attention while your staff walked past me repeatedly. When this young man," she gestured toward Brad, "finally approached me, he suggested I was lost, and then refused to show me the car I'm interested in purchasing." Brad quickly jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. "Sir, I was just explaining to this lady that we're very busy today," he said. Though Dorothy could see that the showroom was nearly empty, the tension was palpable. "I can see exactly how busy you are," Dorothy interrupted, gesturing toward the nearly vacant showroom. She pulled out her documents once more, her movements precise and deliberate. "I came prepared to make a significant purchase today. I've been a mathematics teacher for 45 years, Mr. Bennett. I understand numbers very well, including the ones on this price tag." The manager's face shifted through several expressions: surprise, embarrassment, and finally, what looked like calculated concern. He moved closer to Dorothy, lowering his voice as though trying to diffuse the situation. "Ma'am, why don't we step into my office?" he suggested. "I'm sure we can sort this out. Perhaps we could look at some of our other models that might be more comfortable for someone of your experience." Dorothy felt a familiar fire rising in her chest, the same one she had felt decades ago when facing discrimination in her early teaching years. She stood straighter, her full height barely reaching the manager's shoulder, but her presence filling the space. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice now carrying the tone that had quieted rowdy classrooms for nearly half a century, "I don't need to see other models. I've done my research. I know exactly what car I want, what it costs, and what it should cost you. What I'm not sure about is whether you understand who you're dealing with. She raised her phone and recorded the interaction for everyone to see. My son, James Williams, is a civil rights attorney. My daughter sits on the city council. My grandson, who helped me research this purchase, works for the local news station. But more importantly, she added, her voice steady and unwavering, I am a customer with excellent credit and cash to spend who has been treated poorly in your establishment. The showroom had gone completely silent. Even the soft background music seemed quieter now, as though the entire space was holding its breath. Dorothy's words hung in the air, and in that moment, the power of her presence was undeniable. She had come to this dealership to purchase a car, but what she was doing now was far more important. She was teaching them all a lesson in respect. And this time it was one they would never forget. The atmosphere in the showroom had completely shifted. Other salespeople who had once been pretending to stay busy were now openly watching Dorothy's interaction with Brad and Mr. Bennett. Brad had taken several steps back, his face drained of color as if the situation had escalated beyond what he had anticipated. Richard Bennett, the general manager, had lost the polished smile he'd been wearing earlier, and now his expression seemed to be one of genuine concern, his eyes flicking nervously between Dorothy and the growing crowd of customers who were beginning to gather outside the showroom windows. Dorothy, however, remained unflinching. She stood tall, her posture unwavering as she continued to address the situation with quiet yet powerful confidence. She could feel the eyes of the onlookers, both inside and outside the showroom, on her. There was no turning back now. She had been invisible for too long in a world that had too often overlooked her, her strength, her intelligence, her accomplishments, and today she wasn't going to let that happen again. Miss Williams, Mr. Bennett said, his voice faltering as he stumbled over her name. I'm terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. Let me assist you right away. Dorothy, she corrected firmly, Dorothy Williams. The name carried weight and she made sure he knew it. The same Dorothy Williams who was among the first black teachers to integrate this city's schools in 1963, she continued, her voice growing steadily more powerful as she spoke. The same Dorothy Williams who has spent 45 years teaching young people that their worth isn't determined by how others see them, but by their own capabilities and character. She let those words hang in the air, allowing the gravity of her statement to sink in before continuing. Her tone softened, but it was no less authoritative. I came here today to buy a car, Mr. Bennett. A specific car. I didn't come for excuses or suggestions about more suitable vehicles. I didn't come to be treated like I was lost or confused. I came as a customer, with money to spend, with excellent credit. The question now is not whether I can afford your cars, but whether your dealership deserves my business. Dorothy's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her history and her truth. Her phone, still recording the interaction, captured every word as it echoed throughout the showroom. Through the large windows, Dorothy could see more customers arriving, some of them pausing to observe what was unfolding inside. The showroom, once bustling with activity, now felt eerily quiet. The classical music, which had been playing softly in the background, seemed to grow faint in the tense silence. Mr. Bennett, who had been trying to maintain control of the situation, was now visibly rattled. His smile had disappeared completely, replaced by something that looked more like genuine worry, the kind that only comes when one realizes that the situation is spinning out of control. Dorothy had been here before. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look she had seen countless times in her classroom when a student, or even an adult, finally realized they had underestimated her. They had misjudged her strength, her resolve, and now they were faced with the truth. The lesson was underway and it wasn't going to be an easy one. She waited patiently, still recording the scene on her phone, as Mr. Bennett glanced nervously between her and the small crowd gathering outside. The tension was palpable. Mr. Bennett seemed to be calculating his next move, his mind racing through different scenarios, none of which were favorable for the dealership. And Mrs. Williams, he began, his voice faltering. Please let me personally assist you today. He switched to his most professional voice, but it didn't quite sound convincing. Brad, you can return to your other duties. Brad quickly walked away, visibly relieved to escape the situation he had unwittingly created. Mr. Bennett gestured toward his office. Shall we discuss this somewhere more comfortable? Dorothy shook her head firmly. No, Mr. Bennett. We can discuss this right here. I've already spent enough time being invisible in your showroom. I won't be moved to a back office now that I'm finally being seen. The manager paused for a moment, clearly taken aback. A young woman had entered the showroom and was quietly recording the scene with her own phone. Two more customers stood near the entrance, watching with interest. The other salespeople, who had been pretending to be busy with paperwork, now couldn't help but glance over at the unfolding situation. Mr. Bennett loosened his tie slightly, his nerves beginning to show. "Of course you're absolutely right," he said, though his voice lacked the previous confidence. "Let's look at the E-Class you're interested in." He walked toward the silver car, the polished shoes clicking on the floor with each step. "This is one of our most popular models," he began, his voice still trying to sound confident. "However," he added, unable to help himself, "we do have some excellent C-Class options that many of our older customers prefer." Dorothy's expression remained calm, but her eyes flickered with disappointment. She had hoped that Mr. Bennett's apology would signal a change in his attitude. She had hoped that he would show her the respect she deserved as a customer. But instead he had reverted to his old assumptions. "Mr. Bennett," she interrupted, her voice firm, "I'm beginning to wonder if you're actually listening to me. Let me be very clear. I have the funds and credit to purchase any car in this showroom. The reason I chose the E-Class is not because of what other people prefer. I chose it because I researched every model extensively and determined this was the best fit for my needs." She opened her folder again, pulling out detailed printouts of the car's specifications. "The E-Class offers superior comfort with its air suspension system, which will be helpful for my weekly drives to visit my grandchildren," she explained. "The advanced safety features are exactly what I need for both city and highway driving, and the trunk space is perfect for transporting supplies to the community center where I volunteer." Mr. Bennett's face registered surprise as Dorothy continued speaking. It was clear that he had underestimated her. He had expected an unprepared customer, someone who could be easily swayed by offers of other models. But Dorothy had come prepared, and she knew exactly what she wanted. She paused, giving him a moment to absorb her words before continuing. "Now," she said, her voice steady and unwavering, "would you like to discuss actual numbers, or should I continue my car search at another dealership? One that might be more interested in making a sale than making assumptions?" At that moment, the young woman who had been recording the scene spoke up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "But are you really Miss Dorothy Williams? The teacher from Lincoln High School?" Dorothy nodded, her expression softening just a little. The woman's eyes lit up and she smiled broadly. "You taught my mother. She always talks about how you changed her life. She's a mathematics professor now at the State University." The revelation hit Mr. Bennett like a physical blow. His face paled slightly as he realized the situation was becoming far more complicated than he had initially thought. Not only was he dealing with a well-prepared customer with money to spend, but he was also dealing with someone with deep, far-reaching connections in the community. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice now trembling, "please accept my sincere apologies for any misunderstanding. Let me show you all the features of the E-Class properly." He reached for a brochure, but his hands were shaking. "We can discuss financing options," he continued, "or if you prefer to make a cash purchase first." Dorothy interrupted again, her phone still recording. "I'd like you to explain why you assumed I couldn't afford this car," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "Then I'd like you to explain why you suggested a lower-priced model without knowing anything about my finances. After that, we can discuss whether I still want to make a purchase here." The showroom had grown so quiet that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed loud in comparison. More people had gathered outside, some pressing their faces against the windows to get a better view. Mr. Bennett tugged at his tie again, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him. Dorothy stood there patiently, her phone steady in her hand, waiting for an answer. She had spent decades teaching young minds about numbers, probability, and logic. Now she was teaching a different kind of lesson. One about dignity, respect, and the dangers of making assumptions. And like all great teachers, she was prepared to wait until her student truly understood the lesson she had to offer. Suddenly, Dorothy's phone rang, its cheerful tune cutting through the tense silence. She glanced at the screen, momentarily distracted by the interruption. But she didn't look away for long. The lesson was far from over. Dorothy's phone rang just as the tension in the showroom reached its peak. She glanced at the screen and a smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. It was her son, James Williams Jr., returning her earlier text message. Perfect timing, just as she had planned. She knew this moment needed the weight of his presence, both as her son and as a respected civil rights attorney in the city. "Excuse me, Mr. Bennett," Dorothy said calmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around her. "I need to take this call. It's my son, the civil rights attorney I mentioned earlier." With a quick tap, she activated the speakerphone, making sure her phone's recording feature was still running, capturing every word. "Hello, James, you're on speakerphone," she said, her tone warm but firm. Hey Mom, is everything okay? James's deep, professional voice filled the showroom, and several heads turned at the sound of it. His reputation in the city was well known. James had become one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys, a man who fought for justice in every corner of the city. I just saw your text about the dealership. Do you need me to come down there? The moment his voice rang out, Dorothy saw Mr. Bennett's face drain of all color. His smile, which had once been polished and confident, faded into a nervous grimace. He quickly stepped forward, raising his hands in a vain attempt to defuse the situation. Miss Williams, surely there's no need to involve your son, he said hurriedly, his voice faltering. I'm happy to offer you our best price on the E-Class right now. In fact, I can even throw in some extras at no cost. Dorothy held up one hand, signaling for him to stop, before she spoke into the phone again. James, I've been here for almost an hour now. When I first arrived, no one would help me. Then a young salesman suggested I was lost and needed directions. When I explained that I wanted to buy the E-Class, he told me to come back with my family because he was too busy. This was in an almost empty showroom. She looked directly at Mr. Bennett, her gaze unwavering as she continued. Then the manager here, Mr. Bennett, suggested I might prefer a cheaper model without even asking about my budget or looking at my financial documents. She turned her head slightly, catching the eye of the young woman who had recognized her earlier, who had been quietly recording the entire interaction. The young woman stepped forward, holding up her phone. I got most of it on video, Mr. Williams, she called out. I'm sending it to the news station right now. I work there as an intern. James's voice grew stern, his protective instincts kicking in as he processed what he was hearing. I see, Mom. I'm on my way. Don't sign anything until I get there. Mr. Bennett, he added, his voice hardening, I suggest you don't try to handle this situation alone. You might want to call your corporate office. Through the showroom windows, Dorothy could see more people gathering outside. The news of the incident was already spreading quickly, and social media was ablaze with posts and videos. A few people outside were holding up their phones, recording the scene unfolding inside. Among them, Dorothy recognized several of her former students and their parents. Mr. Bennett, now visibly rattled, pulled out his own phone, his hands shaking as he began speaking quietly but urgently to someone on the other end. His attempts to regain control of the situation seemed futile, as the reality of the growing crowd and the media coverage dawned on him. The tension in the showroom was palpable. Dorothy stood tall, her pearls gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She thought about the years she had spent teaching young people the importance of standing up for themselves. She thought about how she had taught her students that standing up didn't mean losing your dignity. She thought about the first time she had walked into an all-white school in 1963, one of the first black teachers to integrate the city's schools. She had held her head high despite the stares and whispers, and she was doing the same now. Well then, she said, her voice steady and clear, addressing everyone in the showroom, while we wait for my son and the news team, perhaps we should talk about what real customer service looks like. After 45 years of teaching, I find that every difficult moment can be turned into a valuable lesson. She paused for a moment, allowing her words to settle in the air. The sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, signaling that the lesson was about to reach a much larger classroom than she had originally planned. Within 30 minutes, the quiet luxury car dealership had transformed into a scene of intense activity. 2 local news vans were parked outside, their cameras rolling as reporters scrambled to set up. James Williams Jr., wearing a sharp business suit, stood protectively next to his mother, his presence commanding attention. Social media was buzzing with the story, and people were coming forward with their own accounts of discriminatory experiences in the dealership. Ms. Williams, called a reporter from Channel 5, holding out her microphone. Our station has received dozens of calls in the last hour. Many people say they know you. Could you tell us more about your background? Dorothy smoothed her navy suit, standing tall and dignified as she prepared to speak. She had done this countless times in front of her classroom, addressing groups of students, parents, and colleagues with confidence and clarity. This was no different, she was still teaching, but her audience had grown. I spent 45 years teaching mathematics at Lincoln High School, she began, her voice unwavering. But before that, in 1963, I was one of 5 black teachers chosen to integrate the city's school system. The reporter's eyes widened in recognition, the significance of Dorothy's words hitting her immediately. You're that Dorothy Williams? She asked in awe. Dorothy smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride. Yes, I am. Back then, many people didn't think I belonged in that school. Just like today, some people didn't think I belonged in this dealership. But I knew my worth then and I know my worth now. At that moment, James's voice came through the speakerphone again, his tone calm but firm. "I'm 10 minutes away, Mom. The local news van is right behind me." Mr. Bennet, realizing that things were spiraling further out of his control, had retreated to his own phone, speaking quietly and urgently to someone. His staff had gathered in small groups, whispering amongst themselves, trying to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Brad, the original salesman who had caused the problem, was nowhere to be seen. Dorothy stood tall, her eyes scanning the showroom, taking in the faces around her. She saw the young salespeople who would hopefully learn this lesson early in their careers. She saw the daughter of one of her former students still recording everything, her eyes wide with admiration. And she saw the mixture of shame and fear on Mr. Bennet's face. This was a teachable moment, just like the thousands she had used in her classroom over the years. "Mr. Bennet," she said clearly, making sure her phone picked up every word, "what happened here today isn't just about me buying a car. It's about how you and your staff make assumptions about people based on their age and race. It's about the customers who came before me, who might have been too hurt or afraid to speak up. And it's about the customers who might come after me." As the sirens grew louder, Dorothy knew the impact of this moment was about to expand. And then, in the distance, she saw something unexpected. Mayor Thompson, who had heard about the incident, had rushed over. He pushed through the crowd of onlookers, entering the showroom with an air of urgency. "Dorothy," he called warmly, his voice full of recognition and respect. "I can't believe this. You taught both my children calculus?" Turning to the cameras, Mayor Thompson spoke to the crowd. "This woman changed our city's education system when others doubted that inner-city students could handle advanced mathematics. Ms. Williams proved them wrong. Her students have become doctors, engineers, and yes, even mayors." The scene in the showroom had shifted from tense to one of triumph. Dorothy smiled, knowing that the lessons of dignity, respect, and standing up for oneself would be carried far beyond the walls of the dealership. Mr. Bennet, who had been on the phone with his corporate office, was becoming visibly uncomfortable. What had started as a simple case of poor customer service was quickly escalating into something much bigger. Dorothy Williams wasn't just any 80-year-old customer, she was a living piece of the city's civil rights history, a woman whose legacy was far more powerful than the usual car-buying experience. As the dealership's staff scrambled to react, the ripple effect of Dorothy's presence became undeniable. Suddenly, a woman in her 40s pushed through the crowd. "Miss Williams, do you remember me?" she asked, her voice filled with emotion. "Maria Rodriguez. You tutored me after school for an entire year. I'm a mathematics professor now at the university." Her words hit Dorothy like a wave, and she smiled warmly at Maria, recognizing her instantly. She was just one of many former students who were now coming forward to share their stories. Each story painted a portrait of Dorothy Williams not just as a teacher of mathematics, but as a mentor, a guide, and a beacon of hope for students who had faced obstacles in their lives. More former students stepped forward, each with a story to tell. One was a bank president, another was the owner of a successful tech company, and a third was a renowned research scientist. They all credited Dorothy with changing their lives, not only through her teachings but also through her unwavering belief in their potential. The young intern, who had been recording the entire incident on her phone, was busy posting updates on social media. "The video has gone viral," she announced. "Over 100,000 views in just 20 minutes. People are sharing their own Ms. Williams stories with the hashtag dignity and respect." The hashtag had quickly gained traction, and it wasn't just the local community that was watching. The story of Dorothy Williams and her dignified stand against discrimination was spreading like wildfire. James, who had been monitoring the situation on his own phone, looked up at his mother with a proud smile. "Mom," he said, his voice full of admiration, "your story just got picked up by national news. They're calling you the teacher who taught another lesson at 8 each." Dorothy paused for a moment, taking in the magnitude of the situation. What had started as a simple trip to buy a car had turned into a lesson on dignity, respect, and the power of standing up against injustice. Dorothy stood quietly in the middle of the showroom, observing the chaos around her. She saw Mr. Bennet, now hunched over his phone, his face growing increasingly concerned by the minute. The corporate office had seen the viral videos and was sending representatives to the dealership immediately. As she stood there, Dorothy thought about the young people who were watching this unfold on their phones and computers. Once again, she found herself at the front of a classroom, though this one was much larger than any she had taught in before. The lesson wasn't over yet, in fact, it was just beginning. By the time the corporate team from Mercedes-Benz headquarters arrived, The Silver Star Luxury Motors showroom had become the center of a storm that no one had expected. 3 black SUVs pulled into the dealership, their sleek exteriors contrasting with the frenzy that had engulfed the building. The executives inside looked serious as they made their way into the dealership. Leading the group was Sarah Chin, the regional vice president, who had canceled 3 important meetings to handle the situation personally. "Miss Williams," Sarah said as she approached Dorothy, extending her hand with genuine respect. "I watched the videos on my way here. I don't have words to express how deeply sorry we are for how you were treated today." Dorothy shook Sarah's hand firmly, her expression calm but resolute. The showroom was now filled with a mixture of important people: corporate executives, local news teams, city officials, and many of Dorothy's former students, who had refused to leave until they saw justice done. James stood beside his mother, reviewing documents on his tablet, keeping a careful eye on the unfolding events. Sarah Chin turned to face the cameras, knowing that this moment would be watched by millions. "Effective immediately," she announced, "we are making several changes." She looked directly at Dorothy before continuing. "First, Mr. Thompson has been terminated from his position. Brad, the dismissive salesman, has already cleaned out his desk and left through the back door." The room fell silent as Sarah's words hit hard. Mr. Bennett, who had been standing off to the side, now seemed like a ghost of his former self. His earlier confidence was completely gone. Sarah continued, her voice steady but firm. "Mr. Bennett will be required to step down as general manager and undergo comprehensive sensitivity training before being considered for any future management positions." Mr. Bennett's shoulders slumped as he realized the full weight of the situation. "But that's not enough," Sarah added, her eyes now on Dorothy. "This incident has shown us a serious problem in our corporate culture. Therefore we are announcing a new initiative." The room fell into an anticipatory silence. Sarah turned to Dorothy with a look of genuine respect. "Miss Williams," she began, "would you consider helping us create a training program for all our dealerships nationwide?" The room grew quiet as everyone awaited Dorothy's response. She thought carefully before speaking, just as she had done countless times in her classroom when students asked important questions. Dorothy had spent 45 years teaching young people that mathematics wasn't just about numbers, it was about logical thinking and solving real-world problems. Now she faced another problem, one that required the same kind of thoughtful analysis and problem-solving. "Miss Chin," Dorothy replied, her voice calm but resolute, "I spent 45 years teaching young people that mathematics was about more than just numbers. It was about developing the skills to solve real-world problems. If you are serious about making real change, I am willing to help." Sarah nodded eagerly, her respect for Dorothy palpable. "We want to create the Dorothy Williams standard of service," she said. "Every employee in every dealership will need to pass this training program, and we'd like to offer you a consulting position to help develop and oversee it." The news cameras captured every moment as Sarah outlined the other changes. There would be mandatory monthly diversity and inclusion training for all staff, mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds to test customer service, a new customer feedback system focused on equal treatment, and quarterly reviews of sales patterns to check for discrimination. They also announced scholarships for minority students interested in automotive careers. James reviewed the proposed contract on his tablet. "They're serious, Mom," he said quietly. "This could help a lot of people." Dorothy's heart swelled with pride as she saw her former students in the crowd, each of them eager to share their stories. One woman told how Dorothy had helped her believe in herself when no one else would. A man shared how Dorothy had visited his family after his father lost his job, bringing groceries and hope during a difficult time. Each story painted a picture of a woman who had done more than just teach math, she had changed lives. The young intern, who had recorded the original video, was still updating social media. "Dignity and respect is now trending nationwide," she announced. "People are sharing similar stories from dealerships all over the country." The movement had taken on a life of its own, and Dorothy's lesson had gone far beyond the confines of the dealership. As the cameras flashed and the room buzzed with energy, Dorothy felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about a single incident, it was about creating lasting change. She had taught her students to stand up for what was right, and now, through her own example, she was doing the same. The lesson wasn't just for those in the showroom, it was for the entire world to see. The change Dorothy had fought for all her life was finally happening, and it was happening in a way she never could have imagined. A month had passed since the unforgettable incident at the Silver Star Luxury Motors dealership, and Dorothy Williams was now about to experience something she never could have imagined that fateful day. As she pulled into the parking lot of Hampton Mercedes-Benz, a different dealership across town, everything felt different. This time there was a welcoming committee waiting for her. The air was charged with a quiet anticipation, and Dorothy could feel the weight of the journey she had started months ago. When she stepped out of her old Toyota Camry, she was greeted by Lisa Jackson, the dealership's first black female sales manager, who had specifically requested to handle Dorothy's purchase after following her story in the news. "Miss Williams, we've been expecting you," Lisa said with a warm smile. Behind her stood several other staff members, all wearing pins that read Dignity and Respect, the Dorothy Williams standard. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the one Dorothy had encountered at the other dealership. Where the previous showroom had felt cold and dismissive, this one radiated warmth, professionalism, and respect. The showroom sparkled with the same luxurious appeal as the other, but there was an undeniable difference here. On one of the walls she hung a large, framed photograph of Dorothy in 1963, proudly standing in front of her first integrated classroom. The dealership had requested permission to display the image as a reminder to the staff of the values of dignity, respect, and perseverance that had shaped Dorothy's life and work. It was a fitting tribute to the woman who had spent decades teaching others how to break barriers and stand up for what was right. "Your E-Class is ready," Lisa said, leading Dorothy to a beautiful silver Mercedes-Benz that was exactly like the one she had originally wanted. "We've added every safety feature you requested, and I've personally made sure everything is exactly as you specified." Dorothy walked around the car admiring it, but her thoughts were on something deeper. As she did, she noticed a group of young salespeople standing nearby watching her. Their gaze wasn't one of suspicion or dismissal, as she had encountered before. This time they looked at her with admiration, respect, and curiosity. Many of them had already completed the first round of the new Dorothy Williams Standard Training Program. They weren't just interested in the car she was buying, they were interested in the lesson she had taught them. One young man hesitated before speaking. "Miss Williams," he called nervously, "would you mind if we took a picture with you? My mother was actually one of your students in 1975. She's a bank manager now, and she cried when she saw your story on the news." Dorothy smiled warmly and nodded. "Of course, young man. But first, tell me, what did you learn in the new training program?" she asked, genuinely interested. The young salesman stood a little taller, his confidence growing. "We learned that dignity and respect aren't extra features. They come standard with every interaction," he said. "We learned to see people for who they are, not who we assumed them to be." Dorothy's heart swelled with pride. It was clear that the changes she had inspired were already beginning to take root. This wasn't just about a single car purchase. It was about an entire shift in how people saw themselves and each other. As Lisa prepared the purchase paperwork, more people began arriving at the dealership. Local news cameras were there again, but this time they weren't recording a controversy. They were capturing a victory. Dorothy's son James came to review the contracts. This time he was a proud son, not a concerned attorney. "Mom," he said, looking over the papers with a smile, "everything is perfect. They're even matching the corporate office's donation to your scholarship fund." The scholarship fund had exceeded all expectations. In just 1 month, it had raised enough money to help 10 minority students pursue careers in automotive sales and management. Other car companies, not wanting to fall behind the new standards that Dorothy had inspired, had begun to create similar programs of their own. Dorothy's impact was growing far beyond what she had ever imagined. As Dorothy sat in the manager's office, signing the final papers for her new car, she noticed something on Lisa's desk that made her smile. It was a familiar folder, the training manual for the Dorothy Williams Standard Program. Inside were not just rules about customer service, but real stories from people who had faced discrimination. It had become required reading for every luxury car dealership across the country. "You know," Lisa said, following Dorothy's gaze to the manual, "your story changed everything. Last week an 85-year-old woman bought a sports car from us. The week before, a young black entrepreneur bought 3 cars for his company. Nobody blinked an eye." She paused, then added, "That's your legacy, Miss Williams." Finally, the moment arrived. Lisa handed Dorothy the keys to her new Mercedes-Benz E-Class. As Dorothy sat in the driver's seat for the first time, she thought about how much this car represented. It wasn't just a purchase, it was the embodiment of everything she had worked for. The students she had taught to believe in themselves, the barriers she had helped to break down, and the people who would face fewer obstacles because of what had happened. The small crowd gathered in the showroom applauded as Dorothy started the engine. Through the windshield, she could see her old Toyota being taken away. She had donated it to a local charity that helped low-income students get to college. Her new car's license plate read Dignity and Respect. Every mile, every day, it would serve as a reminder of the lesson she had taught the world. As Dorothy drove out of the dealership, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time, she saw not just an 80-year-old woman driving a luxury car but a teacher who had never stopped teaching, a fighter who had never stopped fighting, and a champion for change who had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement of hope. The silver Mercedes-Benz glided smoothly down the street, carrying not just Dorothy Williams but the dreams, aspirations, and dignity of generations to come. Dorothy's life had always been about more than just teaching mathematics. It had been about teaching others how to live with integrity, how to stand up for what was right, and how to make the world a better place for everyone. As she drove into the future, she knew that her work was far from over. The lesson she had started in that showroom would continue to ripple outwards, affecting countless lives, breaking down barriers and spreading dignity and respect everywhere it went.